The following program is made possible with support from the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation.
Welcome to Science Goes to the Movies, a look at the stories of science and how they change our culture. I'm Heather Berlin.
And I'm Faith Salie. We're going to be reviewing current movies, TV shows, and sometimes checking out a blast from the past, but from the scientific point of view. Before we start today, I want to congratulate my colleague, Dr. Heather Berlin, on the publication of her newest paper entitled Neural Correlates of Emotional Response Inhibition in Obsessive-Compulsive Disorder, a Preliminary Study. You even have a subtitle. You can read it in the journal Psychiatry Research Neuroimaging. Congratulations, Heather.
Thank you, Faith. And congratulations on your new book,
Thank
Approval
you.
Junkie, which I've already pre-ordered on Amazon, and I can't wait to read.
Thank you. Obviously, I hope you enjoy it. Today, we're going to look at teamwork and loyalty. What does it mean for the brain? What does it mean for humans?
We're going to start by looking at HBO's new series, Ballers, starring Dwayne Johnson as Spencer Strathmore, a retired football superstar reinventing himself as a financial manager for the newly minted Hot Young Turks of Miami.
Right now, my dreams are all about deals and dollars. I'm your financial manager, and I will put your money to work.
Before the window of opportunity closes up, I saw, I conquered, I ball. Yeah.
What are the three most important things to you?
Football. Yeah. God. Yeah.
Family.
Well, that's good. For a second there, I thought you were going to say friends.
Let's ball.
Let's go ball.
We are delighted today to be joined by Super Bowl champion Carl Banks, former New York Giants linebacker and currently color analyst for Giants Radio Network and president of G-III Apparel.
Hi.
Carl, in an early episode of Ballers, there's this new player. He's Ricky. He's played by John David Washington, and he's warned not to screw up his teamwork. Can one guy really mess up a team?
Oh, absolutely.
Can you give me an example? What did you see in your time playing?
Well, there are a lot of things that can disrupt the chemistry of a locker room. Players that are not on time, players that are too self-centered, drugs can become a factor. Selfish play.
What is selfish play on the field?
It could be all about them. They don't want to work within the construct of the framework of the team, and they go off and do their own thing because it worked better for them. It didn't work for the team. So you put, in the case of football, you put 10 other guys in jeopardy because you wanted to go and take a chance and do something, and it didn't work out, or maybe it did, but 7 other guys were blocked and the play was still successful.
Carl, what's going on in your brain when you and your team take the field?
Well, it depends. Obviously winning, being very good, but depends on what the immediate task is, who I may have to face every single down.
Like an individual player? Are you thinking of that guy?
If you're trying to block me, I've studied you, and I've either found out. No, you shouldn't judge me here, okay? Don't you judge me.
This is fascinating.
So if I studied you in film for a week and a half, right?
That's what you do?
I've either developed a strong dislike for you, that I would walk into the game very angry, looking forward to punishing you, or I've developed this healthy respect for you, and I knew it was going to be a very, very competitive battle between us, but we were going to shake hands afterwards, right?
Yeah.
But either way, I wanted to win.
Yeah.
But if my opponent was a bad guy, but that's who he is. He's a rough, tough, and tumble, and my ego is saying, nope, you're not going to be that to me. I'm seeing how you're beating up all these guys. I'm going to be angry. I'm going to develop, and I'm going to study you, though. I'm going to find out all your weaknesses, and I'm going to show you who's the tougher guy.
Is he doing that to you the whole week, too? Is he
I don't know if he's
studying you?
studying me or not. That's not my concern. My concern is not to be either humiliated, embarrassed, blocked, or whatever. But then there are guys that you'll have a healthy respect for, and they could be doing the same thing, just a little classier, and you'll say, you know what, I'm going to compete my butt off against him. I'm going to find his weaknesses. But when that game's over, we're going to shake hands and we're going to have a healthy respect for it. And other guys, when the game's over, I probably would hope you would never return to the game. I beat you up so bad.
So
Don't judge me.
when I've had an NFL game on and my husband's watching, I always say, "Are they saying stuff to each other?
Yeah.
Like, what are you saying? We
It's
can
fun
bleep it.
stuff. A
What
lot
are
of
you
it's
saying?
fun. Okay, so if you just happen to be that person that I really respect, right?
Okay.
And you just knock my socks off, I'm going to get up and I'm probably going to laugh and say, that was one hell of a shot you gave me, right? And he'll probably look back and say, yep, I know. I knew I could get you on that one. You know, and then the next one you'll get him, and I said, I knew I could get you on that one. But then there's the guy that no one likes, right? And you give him one and he gets up yapping and you just say, there's more coming.
Oh.
Keep talking, there's more coming.
You know what it reminds me of? It reminds me like when there's two boxers, you know how they like get up and they stare each other down and it's all this psychological war, you know, that's what it is. I mean, you asked what's happening in his brain, but it's really what's happening in his mind that's the key element here, and how you're viewing the whole scenario and what you're finding within yourself to motivate you to actually have to keep getting up and hitting another person.
Right.
Being hit.
And being attacked and attacking, and what's going to keep you going? What's going to keep you getting up again?
Well, some
Is
people
there
are more
fear?
competitive.
Did you ever feel fear? You got hit. You know you're in for pain.
Pain was never the issue. You signed up for it. Like if you've played football, right, or hockey, there's nothing about it from the minute you put your uniform on and went to practice that told you that you could be successful without any contact. If it's a contact sport, then you know there's going to be some level of contact. I mean, I'm not saying you signed up to be, you know, beat up to the point of incapacitation, but there's physical. Any contact sport, you know that there's going to be contact.
But there's actually studies show, and I'll ask you how you felt, but you know, when you experience pain on the field, a lot of the time when you're in that battle mode, when you're in that fight or flight kind of situation, your brain actually, your pain networks are being suppressed for survival. So if you get hurt on the field, sometimes you don't feel the pain until after you get off.
You can wake up in the morning and be like, man, my back or my hip hurts. And you have to go back and look at the tape and say, oh, wow, that's when that happened. That's why this feels like this, right? But then, by the same token, there are people who will play who are very good that if they had pain, they would shut it down. They would be like, I can't go anymore, I'm hurt. Other people have a higher pain threshold. And they play through pain and they have a sense of responsibility to their teammates to say, hey, look, if I can walk, I'm going to be out there for you. Other people say, if it's too painful and I can walk, I'll be here rooting you on the sidelines. So
which were you?
You'll have to look that up.
Go to the tape.
You have to look that up.
And in Ballers, there's this character named Charles who was a really successful player, but then he retires early, and now he's sort of set a bit adrift in the real world, as if the team was sort of a major part of his identity. Do you ever see this with some of your teammates or even with yourself? 85, I would say 75 to 85% of former players probably go through an identity crisis at some point after sports. And I think the reason is, and you'll probably relate to this from a scientific standpoint, there is nothing there's no challenge in the real world that has been as thrilling and immediately gratifying as the success or failure in sports. Make or miss, right? Get it back, try again, right? The euphoria of winning, right? If you go into a boardroom, that might be a quarter, 3 months later, you know, to know whether or not you won or lost. The immediate feedback, the sense of camaraderie. You got up every morning and did the same thing since you were, 12 years old in some cases. And you were always around a fellowship of people, whether you liked them or not, that was your group, right? And that was not your group
in class when you were in college or in elementary school. You still left those friends, and this was your group. This was
Sounds
your
like
family.
returning from war in a way.
Well, yeah, it's similar. But you always had a social life. You always had your wife, you had your kids, or whatever you had, right? But the one thing that you look forward to every day is going into, you lift weights, you run. If you're a golfer, and golfers probably have more of a normal life than competitive, heavy, combative sports, I should say, not competitive. Golf is very competitive. But you have this group that you've always been around. It's always been your
Tribe.
family, you know? And aside from your family at home, you go to work with these guys and you go to battle, but the preparation that it takes on a weekly basis, the information that you have to process on a weekly basis to prepare, 3 days to prepare for a Sunday, and then it's over and you do it again.
What
Right.
does that look like in the brain? If you're used to getting all these hits, right, of adrenaline and dopamine and all that kind of feedback, what does an identity crisis look like in a brain?
That's a really good question. And
Detachment, right?
yeah, there's a lot of things going on. So when you're with a group of people, and again, we've evolved to really enjoy being in groups, to have that social interaction. So you've developed a camaraderie. You get oxytocin, which is a bonding chemical. When you're playing, you're going into battle, as you said. You get the sort of adrenaline, the cortisol, the fight or flight. At the same time, most professional players aren't hugely aroused because that would be detrimental. You have to learn how to practice so much that it's almost automatic and you can remain calm and focused as well. So it's kind of a sort of neurochemical cocktail of bonding chemicals, of excitatory chemicals, all in one. Now, you can liken it to maybe going into battle or also, people who are entertainers, right? Going on stage and performing,
Yes.
is described in the same way. And that's why a lot of either actors who don't get another job or, players who come off the field can get depressed because you're no longer getting a lot of those feel-good chemicals as well that can lead to depression, as well as what you
Right.
might call an identity crisis. Identity crisis really means a crisis of who am I? Who am I as a person? How do I identify with myself now? But besides those kinds of questions, a real depression, a sadness.
Yes, but here's the thing that in competitive sports that I think helps a lot of athletes at any level. If you reverse engineer the process of what it took for you to be at the level that you were, a college player or a professional football, you have the requisite skills for anything, any genre or sector of employment. Because everything you've done under duress. You've done it, whether you succeeded or failed, you had to get up and be better at it.
Resilience,
within
diligence.
60 seconds in football, you get knocked down, you know whether or not you made a play or not. But the game is 60 minutes, so you got to get up and do it again.
Yeah.
But you got to rely on your preparation that came when you were in the classroom. But now things are flying, people are hitting, and there may be an adjustment that needs to be made. So you have leadership skills.
Dwayne Johnson and the writers on Ballers do a great job of quietly weaving Spencer Strassmore's ongoing physical pain into the character. At first, he's just popping the occasional prescription pill, but as the story unfolds, we see he's in considerable pain and worried about the state of his brain. Carl, is that a fear that most players live with?
I think now it is, because we know better. We know that there is a lot of science behind traumatic brain injury. Guys are really cognizant. We've had players that quit after 1 year, 2 years, because they're like, listen, I had, one too many concussions. I had 2 concussions, and that's more than I need. I think what we don't know, and maybe you may know, Doc, is does everyone's brain operate the same? Because I played a very high impact position, and I know of 1 concussion where I was completely knocked out, right? That was my rookie year. And I played the sport as violent as anyone. Now, would they classify our concussions or head trauma now? I probably didn't, but I don't think I've ever been knocked out, dazed, where I couldn't, and I never had any post-game effects of headaches or things of that nature that I can think of. So I don't know if people react, or brains or something like that differently. And I'm thanking my lucky stars, by the way, because I don't know. You know what I mean? I just...
But it sounds like you have a question for Heather, which is, do all brains react the same?
Yeah, so obviously this is a big issue, and it's been coming to the forefront now that it's not just about getting a blow to the head, but the number of times you get the blow to the head. And it's not necessarily how long you've been knocked out for. You know, you can lose consciousness for 30 seconds.
Right.
And the amount of times you get hit in the head can actually, it has a multiplicative effect. Now, not everybody who has multiple blows to the head necessarily gets, it's an inevitability that you're all going to have brain damage.
Right.
I'm doing research with some patients with what we call mild traumatic brain injury. You get a blow to the head, maybe you're knocked out for 30 seconds or even a minute. You know, we're not talking long periods of time. And then they're coming in with complaints of they can't focus, like lack of attention, impulsive behavior. And they go in and they do a traditional MRI scan, which looks at the neuroanatomy, and they don't find anything wrong, and they're sent home, and they're still having these symptoms. Then there's more recent technology, things called DTI, or diffusion tensor imaging, where we can actually look at the white matter connectivity between different parts of the brain, and it's more looking at the microstructure of the brain. And with that, we do see differences. We do see that in the connectivity, particularly in the prefrontal cortex, there is some damage, and that correlates with how impulsive they are. So again, it's not everybody, and if you're not having symptoms, that's a really good sign, you know, and that means hopefully the way in which you got hit, the amount of force, you know, there's all different factors that go into it. The brain is like this very soft little piece of tissue inside this very bony, you know, sharp-edged casing, and if you shake it back and forth in a certain way, there's going to be damage. So you were lucky, hopefully, that you didn't get that kind of a hit. And some people can have one hit, and it just happens to be in the wrong way, and they're going to have problems the rest of their life.
Right.
There can be problems later in life where acting out, suicide rate is really high now as well. So it's not in players, in former players. It's not necessarily everyone.
I have a question about that. And listen, far be it from me to challenge the science of it. The psychology of it, I think, factors into, and I don't know, I've never contemplated suicide a day in my life, right? But we had this conversation earlier in this show about depression. We had this conversation about detachment and sense of identity. And some people can't cope because, and I'm not saying this as it relates to suicide, I'm talking about as it relates to not finding something to do that matches what you've done in football, right? I don't know if that leads some people to thoughts of suicide. We know for a fact that it leads to depression, right? And so if you have a combination, and this may be something you can answer, but if you have a combination of a person who was highly successful, but maybe he had a lot of things going on in terms of his trauma, brain trauma, right? Then he's got this depression thing because he can't find himself, and he can't find anything that matches that euphoria of playing and competing. And then all of a sudden, does that exasperate?
So it's very hard to
or accelerate.
It's very hard to disentangle whether these higher rates in depression or even suicide is related just to the psychological aspects of no longer finding anything that's as stimulating as being a player,
right?
And or having the head trauma, or if it, you know, in conjunction, those two things together.
Right. Is one a byproduct of the other? You know, maybe the guy was
hard to disentangle.
So depressed, and maybe he had lost a lot of things in business, and he just couldn't find that winner, and he just says, oh, you know what, forget it. And then all of a sudden he does that, and then they say, well, we're going to examine his brain. Well, see, he did it because he had multiple concussions.
Finding something wrong with the brain doesn't necessarily excuse behaviors that
Well,
are...
that's the psychological aspect of it is what I'm asking, because what prompted the individual, because there are individuals, unfortunately, in our society that kill themselves that have never done anything, right? So if we examine the psychology of why those people or what they went through, and if you put side by side, you know, a person who lost his business and millions of dollars, right? And this pro football player who lost his business and millions of dollars, and they both decided that, or professional athlete, and they both decided that they couldn't live in this world anymore and they took their own life. The person who committed suicide, the businessman, right? Nobody's going to examine his brain for trauma, right? But the athlete who may have had similar unfortunate circumstances, right? He did the same thing, but you'll examine his brain and say, yeah, well, that's a factor in why he did it.
You know what's a better analogy?
He should have been stronger.
I agree with that point, and it is very hard to disentangle, but a better analogy of more recent findings is that what they really are finding tied to this having multiple concussions is early onset Alzheimer's type symptoms, and that's really tied. I mean, you can almost see the biochemical process that's occurring with tangles and plaques that's causing this early onset Alzheimer's, and that really does seem to be linked up to having the multiple concussions. So that one is a little bit more clear cut than the depression one, which has a lot of different things that can feed into the etiology of that disorder. So yeah, something to be cognizant about.
Yeah.
Dwayne Johnson's character, Spencer Strathmore, is a deeply loyal and giving man. And part of what makes the show so great is watching this guy manage much more than just the financial interests of the clients.
As humans, we may not always exhibit great loyalty and generosity, but we love stories about people who do. In the film Everest, based on real-life events, climbers descending the summit of Mount Everest are set upon by a violent storm. Facing devastating odds, the climbers struggle to get to safety. Just watching that trailer makes me feel physically uncomfortable. Like at one point, I feel the lactic acid going down to my feet and my heart beating. It's so uncomfortable. Okay, let's talk about this whole putting team before self thing. Where in the brain does that kind of impulse or generosity lie?
So there's no one place in the brain where there's selflessness, so to speak. There's a network in the brain that has to do with your feeling of your sense of self. And in certain situations, love being one of them, having an orgasm being one of them, you lose the network in your brain that has to do with your sense of self gets a bit decreased. You know, activation goes down, and you lose your sense of self, and you feel this oneness, either with the universe or with another person. So your boundary between self and other can disintegrate. And we can actually even stimulate a certain part of the brain, the temporal parietal junction, with a magnet called transcranial magnetic stimulation, and cause a person to have like an out-of-body experience, to feel disconnected from their body. So we definitely know that it's physical in the brain. Now, I'm going to hypothesize that when somebody does something selfless, that they are, in a sense, feeling either one with another person or feeling one with that team, where their neural network of their sense of self is going down. And again, that's combined with feelings with prosocial, with empathy. You know, part of our prefrontal cortex is active during when we're feeling empathy, theory of mind, like putting yourself in somebody else's shoes and imagining what they're thinking. So there's a lot going on that all leads into this behavior. It's really complex. If we could predict what makes somebody selfless, you know, it'd be a really good drug to give people to stimulate that part of the brain.
Well, what do both of you think? Do team sports contribute to the cultivation of this team mentality in real life situations?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I think team sports is the ultimate in terms of camaraderie and sense of support, while maintaining your individuality, but knowing that there's a higher purpose or a greater cause is what team sports is always about. You know, you win or lose based on the collective being on one accord or everyone on a different page. But and if you know that the success or failure all depends on everybody being in conjunction, or everything, as you said earlier, firing. It's maybe different, but they're firing in concert to make everything work. And so I think organized sports, team sports are the epitome of how that should work.
Carl Banks, you're a winner again. Thank you so much.
I did win today because I'm sitting here having a great conversation.
It was a great conversation.
I never get to have these types of conversations.
I learned a lot.
This is awesome.
It's like a therapy session. I really enjoyed it.
Was it therapeutic for you?
Yes, it was for me too.
I don't know if it was therapeutic for me, but it was great to have the conversation. No, it was.
Thank you so much for coming by.
Thank you for having me, both of you guys.
It's been great. Don't forget to check us out on the web at cuny.tv under the Science tab, where you'll find past shows, additional content, and a link to our app.